everyone. My name is Jesse Chason with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Welcome everybody to Airing Addiction. If you're watching us live or hearing this pretty soon, we're fastly approaching Christmas. It is less than a week away, and I hope you and your loved ones and family are healthy and get to spend some time together with everybody, hopefully some time, away from work and just focusing on the people closest to you that are the most important to you. So certainly we thought long and hard about who to have on the podcast for this month, and I think we landed on a great guest that is very topical for this time of the month. So I will turn it over to Lisa to introduce our guest. Who do we have, Lisa?
Thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, and I echo your thoughts. I hope folks are able to celebrate however they do with peace and love. But I also know that sometimes that's not available to everyone. And this time of year can actually be really hard for those that are struggling with loss or have family members with addiction and substance use disorder. And it isn't always a joyous, peaceful time of year. It can be a source of stress and anxiety, or things might look a little bit different in your holiday celebrations. And so I'm really happy to have our guest on today. I recently read a media piece he had done, and just everything he says just strikes so much of a chord with me and with some of the work that we have done here on the podcast. So I'm really pleased to introduce Ken Feldstein. He's the peer recovery coach for Signature Healthcare's OBAT program. So for folks listening that don't know what OBAT means, it's office-based addiction treatment, meaning an outpatient office-based care setting that's providing medications for opioid use disorder. He's a certified addiction recovery coach and a licensed substance use counselor. He's been in recovery for many, many years, and we'll let him share as much as he'd like about that. But he's touched a lot of lives across the peer support area. Opened a peer recovery center on the South Shore, has run relapse prevention, refuge recovery, many other groups across the South Shore of Massachusetts. And so with that, though, I'll let Ken share as much as you'd like about your own story, your own journey, but I also want to include in this conversation whatever you're comfortable sharing about your family's journey into recovery. So welcome, Ken. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Jesse, for having me. I really appreciate that. Your description of my time in recovery as many, many years is very charitable. And it is true. As you can see, I'm kind of a recovery saurus of sorts. My own personal story, goes back to the late, 1960s. And let's just say I spent about 3 years addicted to heroin, from ages 15 to 18, a little bit more than 3 years. And went into treatment in January of 1972. And back in the day, this was in New York, there were a lot of programs that were available to folks to spend as much time as they want in treatment without it being insurance dependent and without it costing any out-of-pocket at all. So I spent 1.5 years living in what's fondly referred to as a therapeutic community, and it saved my life. I was living in the Bronx for a while. I was living in upstate New York for a while. And as I look back on that experience, really what it was, I think a big part of it was the fellowship. I was in a program with 110, 115 other people. It was very much a concept, and it was co-ed. So, we were each other's brothers and sisters. And every morning we had a morning meeting. Somebody would get up in front of the 110 people and sing a song or recite a poem or tell a joke or in some other way, sort of break down that street image. We were people that walked in the door with all kinds of baggage, and the 18 months for me was an opportunity to kind of break all that down and relearn the tools and the skills that I was going to need to go back home. And as we all know, anybody that's been in treatment, it's all about coming home. It's all about coming back into the community and figuring out how to keep the recovery momentum going. So there's nothing like that really left in this country. Unfortunately, insurance very much drives the bus in terms of, inpatient residential treatment. Insurance dictates how many days it takes for a person to get well. It's like 30 or 35, and I can assure you that is insufficient. And it's just weird to me, and has been odd for many, many years, that how did insurance get to make that determination? But it is the situation that we have. And for me, again, it's all about getting better in the community, okay? Because we all have to come home at some point. So, one of the things I wanted to, chat about was, this idea of community and family. So I attribute, my success in treatment to having other people to share with who had their stories. I had my story. We shared our stories. We challenged each other. We got mad at each other. We learned how to express anger and love, in a way that was less and less threatening the longer we stayed in the program and learned those skills. But the fellowship was a big part of it. And I feel today, one of my main roles as a recovery coach here in an MOUD program is, listen, it's great when people get stable in their opioid use disorder with Suboxone or Sublocade or Vivitrol or methadone. But for me, it's like I try really hard to connect people to a recovery community in addition to the medication, because then it makes the chances for a sustained recovery more realistic. Give people the opportunity to get counseling, and then the counseling with the medication together makes for better outcomes in general. People, need to make new friends. People need to find sober social activities, and getting that community and getting their family set up is a really big part of recovery, in my opinion. We were talking earlier about, all pathways to recovery. Listen, it doesn't matter, what you select. It could be, listen, I used to go to, I'd go to AA meetings and I'd see the same people in AA that I just saw in Smart Recovery. So it's interesting how, AA, some people are like, oh, it's, too religious and too spiritual for me. So I go to Smart Recovery because it's more, behavioral and more scientific. But then there's a cross pollination of people, because getting in that circle, getting in that room with others, to me, that common denominator, you never know what you're going to hear in that room. You'll hear something 50 times in a meeting over the course of, 5 years. And then one day somebody says something that you've heard so many times before, but the way that they express it resonates with you all of a sudden, and it could possibly become, it's certainly a pearl of wisdom, and it can become a brick in that recovery foundation for you. So I'm a big supporter of all pathways to recovery. And then I wanted to just focus for a second on family, because Lisa and Jesse, are very timely with this podcast in terms of what's going on with families now that might have someone, a child, a spouse, suffering and going through an addiction, a challenging substance use disorder. And the holidays seem to bring up some challenging moments for people, triggering moments for people. And I'm just a believer in, and I had to learn this the hard way, because I have a son who is now going on 11 years in recovery, who was addicted to heroin for 6 years. And my wife at the time and I, went to seek help for ourselves in terms of how to best handle, our son. Tough love was kind of the mantra at the time. Very focused on, if you let your son live it at home, if you feed him, if you give him money, if you put gas in his car, it's virtually the same thing as perpetuating his addiction. And we didn't want to do that, but that was what we believed we were doing based on the conventional feedback at the time. And we didn't let him come home. He lived in his car for 4 or 5 months. He continued to use. He didn't get better, he got worse and probably came close to dying. And it made me question, is this really the best way? Is there another way? How do you buck conventional wisdom and, feel like you're being called an enabler, feeling like your hand is on the syringe that's going into his arm. And I hated feeling that way. We loved our son. The parent's instinct is to love and nurture and heal and protect and find a way to make things better. And eventually I realized that my natural lane as a father to my son was to love him. Nothing more natural than that. Why is that not okay to do? Why is that, why does that make me an enabler or somebody that makes his addiction, worse? So once I decided, and it was, the piece that Lisa refers to in the WBUR article, my son participated in it, and he talked about, my first wife, his mother, was dying from breast cancer in the months before he decided not to use anymore. And he came out of treatment. He was in treatment probably for the 25th time and knew he was going to lose his bed if he came home to help out with her care. But he felt so strongly about doing that he gave up his bed. He came home. He carried her up and down the stairs. He helped feed her. He was really an important person in the care of his mother as she was passing away. And he talks about this pivotal moment where he opened the refrigerator one day and there was liquid morphine vials, and he just decided, you know what? He had it in his hand, and he goes, you know what? I'm done. I just can't do this anymore. And I think the line he used, which was very touching to me, was, this family deserves a break, And it was just that little seed, you know, and that started it for him. And that was in 2012, and here we are in 2023, and he has, you know, that many years of uninterrupted, sustained recovery from that moment. But it was all about finding, you know, finding love as and support and compassion, and not feeling, not caring about being judged as an enabler or codependent or whatever the words were used at the time. It was, that's my natural role. I'm going to love my son. And I really feel at that point, everything changed in the family dynamic, and love won. So, yeah, so that's kind of a piece of the story. And I think it's important to bring it up now, particularly as we come on Christmas and New Year's. I would say, you know, listen, maybe love doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for me, and you know, that's what I wanted to get across today. So thanks.
And I knew you would get that across just even having read the article. And I'm sure, Jesse, you have a lot to share. You yourself having gone through a modified therapeutic community, so slightly different at Spectrum, some of that history. So maybe we'll start with that, but then I'd love to make some comments about a lot of what you said and some of the parallels I'm drawing. So I don't know if you want to jump in, Jesse.
Thanks, Lisa. So yeah, Ken, I'm happy to report that even as of 2011, modified therapeutic communities were still a thing, and that's where I got my start. Sounds like the size of yours and the time in treatment was just about double what I experienced, but I was there for 8 months. It was co-ed. It was about 60 of us, and I could really identify with a lot of, you know, you brought back a lot of memories talking about the morning meetings and just the fellowship and the sense of camaraderie, and you know, I still talk to some of those people today.
That's great.
And you know, as I'm sure you've made your own connections, and you know, the recovery community piece is just so important, because you're right, you know, coming home, that's where sort of the rubber meets the road. And you know, you can stay in recovery when you're surrounded by recovery, but when you leave, you know, what then? And fortunately, my story is one where, you know, I had a recovery event to look forward to. So I got out of treatment, and then, you know, sort of put the goal, if you will, of, you know, in 1 week, I know I'm going to this recovery event, and it's already all set up. So I go there, and then I just meet all these people and connect and fellowship, and it's beautiful. So I also enjoyed your use of the term cross-pollination, right? Where you see the same people at AA, Smart Recovery, or maybe, you know, dabbling in an organized religion and then in an NA meeting or whatnot, because, you know, we're all just searching for a solution, however that comes about. And, you know, I like to say that there's so many resources out there for people in recovery that, you know, you almost can't exhaust them all in one lifetime. There's just so many different things to be a part of and do. So as far as questions for your story, I would love to hear about what that meant, you know, to you, to put some practicality around it. When you said love one, obviously you take your son back into your house. I know a lot of people that are listening to this are like, that's the exact thing that people told me not to do, and you said it too. So what did that look like? Was there, you know, successes right away? Was there some challenging bumps in the road? How did you navigate all that? I'd love to hear about any of that.
Yeah, great question, Jesse. Thank you. Yeah, so there was this, you know, this watershed moment, and Brendan referred to it in the piece about, I guess we were at a gas station, and I was putting, you know, paying for, you know, him to gas up his car. And he described me as looking so just tired and sad, but, you know, there was love in my eyes too. And he recognized that. And that was and keep in mind, I've never heard Brendan tell his story or a piece of his story until this article came out last month. And so for me, hearing it for the first time, I mean, obviously I was like boo-hooing big time, but it was a moment that changed everything. So, he went once he decided he put that vial back in, we lived through the passing of his mother. Barbara and I had been together, 30 some odd years. We were a few months shy of our 30th wedding anniversary. And she had dealt with breast cancer for 17 years leading up to that point. And so the whole family was just devastated and exhausted, emotionally and physically exhausted and drained. And I'm not saying that, families have to get to that point, but, that's where we were at. And when Brendan made that decision to stop, he sought out residential treatment, and he did spend, I think, a good half a year at a program in, I think it was in Alston, and then came out, spent some. He had two roommates that were also recoveries, and the three of them shared an apartment together, and he sort of brought that community with him a bit, to have their first apartment together. They were friends in the program, and now they were out in the community, and they were going to meetings together. And I was asked to come and speak when he was getting his 1 year chip, and so we had a lot of I would say when he was in early recovery, a lot of opportunity to just continue to share the important moments and the milestones. And even if it was just, meeting them for pizza in the city or whatever it was, I mean, for me, it was like a just great joy. I just great joy in seeing him not only being alive, but thriving in his recovery, seeing him, go to work, seeing him, do well. I guess that's how I would answer that question, Jesse. And then one thing I wanted to say a comment about is, so when I was in that program back in the early 70s, there was a counselor there. His name was Stu. And for some reason, Stu took an interest in me, trusted me. He and his wife were living there. He was a counselor and she was a teacher in the program. And they had a very, very young toddler. And, they had me babysit their baby one night, and while they went out, and trusting me with their little girl. They didn't really know me very well, this drug addict from wherever I was from, but that trust and that sort of giving me the chance to feel thought of in a good light again after bringing so much shame and so much aggravation and anxiety to my family when when my addiction became public, through getting arrested a couple of times and that type of thing. It was such a breath of fresh air to have somebody who I hardly knew just trust me. And so fast forward, so Stu's now probably 78 or 79. A few years ago, he was going to be giving a talk at a program in Maryland called the Ashley, and he would go every other Saturday. And I went to visit him one day, and he springs on me, the guy that I usually do this with is sick today. Do you want to say a few words to the outgoing group of people that were there for 28 days? So it was day 27. So I said, yeah, I'll speak about day 28 and how important day 28 is going to be for everybody. And then as I'm, I give my little spiel, people are asking questions, and one person said, hey, Ken, how have you stayed, sober this long? And it was like, wow, it's like nobody really ever asked me that question before. So I realized, and this was an amazing moment, that So Stu's sitting like 20 feet away while I'm babbling, and I realized that I didn't want to let him down, and the motivation of that, of that thought of I didn't want to disappoint him because of the interest that he took in me. It sounds corny, but I didn't realize how powerful it was until I started crying in front of the 35 people that were there, because it was so meaningful and powerful. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So what, yeah, I mean, that actually just solidifies kind of the theme that I am consistently hearing really across the recovery community, which is why this is my favorite hour of the month always. But that theme of, and I think it's so closely tied to love, so I'd love to connect it back to that, but connection, right? So there's so many things. I just wrote that down about, I think, 10 times throughout listening to your story, hearing what Jesse had to say, hearing what you had to say, that is so important, right? And so you work in an MOUD program, you talk about multiple pathways, and that you encourage that connection to the recovery community, because I do think, and I'm a therapist, right? So like, obviously I think that connection is important, but that there's a difference between stability, safety, harm reduction, and recovery. And often that difference is that connection, and that there's a common thread, as Jesse picked up on as well, between, regardless of what your pathway is, right, that connection is important, right? So whether it's 12-step smart recovery, refuge recovery, it really does fall back on that connection. And that's really what you did as a father, right? Is you never let go of that connection. So no matter how tired and exhausted you were, that connection was the most important, and your son could still even feel it, and see it. And one of the other things that really struck me that's so connected to how important that connection is for Brendan, taking care of his mother, I think, was probably in some ways even more important than that treatment bed that he left, right, to do that. Not just important to him, but probably important to his recovery. So we know what addiction does to the brain, right? We know how it rewires everything and all of your thinking. And it really strikes me that he was really rewiring his brain by really taking care of his mother, so that when he held that vial, right, he was able to make a different decision that would have been so much harder to do before really spending that time, using connection. We've had Dr. Jessica Griffin, Dr. Zlatina Kostova on, really, who are trauma experts, and talking about how really the ways to healing both trauma and addiction, because they really do hit kind of the same parts of the brain, is that affiliate response, which is essentially humans' ability to connect to each other, right? And to turn to each other when we're having a hard time. So, I could go on for a while, but it just seems like such a common thread throughout your own recovery story, your choices as a father to sit in that love and connection throughout your role, and then even in your son's recovery story, it's really quite important. And it really hit you, kind of what you just said when you were just asked when giving that talk, right? How have you stayed in recovery for this long? And it's that connection to Stu. You don't want to disappoint him. That connection's important to you.
That's true. And the other thing too is, we talk about the word shame a lot, and people, shame can be a trigger, for folks to use, because the emotion and the self-disappointment, people don't want to feel that way. So, they find a way to, feel it less. And, Jesse had mentioned in the beginning about, before I think we even started, about the, and maybe it was you too, Lisa, about sort of the genetic connections and similarities in terms of, I was a person that was, addicted to heroin. Brendan became a person that was addicted to heroin. And I remember shame being a motivating factor for me when I came home. It's like I had felt so bad about bringing shame on my family that it was not a trigger anymore. It was a motivator to stay in recovery. And then Brendan had mentioned, that piece about he felt that the family, needed a break. Family needed a reason to keep on keeping on, and it was in that spirit, that he made his decision. So it's just interesting. Didn't make that connection before today. So thank you for that.
Well, keeping with the theme of connection, I don't think I've mentioned this on the show before to Lisa, but I have my own stew, and her name is Rebecca Kender. Rebecca is somebody who has been with Spectrum for a million years, and she was the person who did my phone screen when I was in jail to come to the program. And the story that I heard that I'm going to tell, I just heard this year. I had not heard it before, but I did remember in jail, I was lacking coping skills and empathy, and I was not a very happy person. So I do remember getting into a disagreement with the jail staff escorting me to the case manager's office to talk to Rebecca. And I do remember him threatening to cancel the interview and put me back in my cell. And I said, well, no, let's just go. So I get in there, and apparently this guy, who I don't hold any ill will toward, I probably roles reverse would have done the same thing. He picks up the phone and tells Rebecca, you're not going to like this guy. You're not going to take him. And hands me the phone. I do my phone screen. I don't remember what we talked about. I've done a million phone screens. I'm sure there was some sort of history taken. And in that moment, in that connection, she gave me a chance. And I ended up getting a parole bed to Spectrum. Now, all that happened, and great. We've worked together for years, and it's been really cool to have that full circle moment where we certainly reflected on that. Earlier this year, she told me that story for the first time when we were at a sporting event that Spectrum had tickets to, and it was her and a family member and myself and one of my 3 children. And something that keeps me going, to your point, Ken, not only not wanting to disappoint Rebecca, but also the gratitude, seconds and inches, right? Seconds and inches. I shouldn't be here. If life was fair, I'd still be in jail or not breathing, right? But I'm here, and I get to live this pretty awesome life in recovery. So, she tells me this story, and in a moment, in my mind's eye, my middle daughter just vanishes in front of me. And I think of, what if she said no? What if Rebecca took that guy's word for it and said, you know what? Yeah, don't even do the phone screen. Put her back in his cell. Would I be sober? Maybe. Would I be working in the field? Maybe. I wouldn't have the life I have today. And that was all a direct result of a connection made on the phone that was further solidified, right, when I lived at that modified therapeutic community. And I haven't told that story in the podcast yet. So thank you for jostling that one for my brain and help me put that out there. So I don't really have a question. I just needed to say that, I guess.
Love that.
Well, thanks for sharing it.
We do still have a modified therapeutic community in Weymouth. So on the South Shore, Project Turnabout. So folks are interested in that model. It's shifted and over time, right? Because just like we said in the beginning, we have to be open to all pathways of recovery. And so we do things slightly differently, but there's some things that we can hold on to that are really supportive, like those morning meetings and how you start your day and how you end your day, for sure. I do think it might be helpful to shift to a bit to any family members that are listening now. What are things that they can do during this holiday season? What are ways that they can do what you did, Ken, and really, land on love? Like, I loved that so much. So I just think that's just such a beautiful sentiment. And stay focused on that love and connection with your loved one, no matter how exhausting it is this time of year. What can folks do now, if they've got a loved one who is struggling?
Yeah. So, I don't want to bring up the show The Bear. Anybody, have you guys seen The Bear? If not, at some point when you're feeling particularly strong, in the third season of The Bear, I think it's the second to last episode, called Fishes. It's an hour-long episode of a holiday dinner. Okay. Probably Christmas Eve, the whole seven fishes thing. And as dramatically dysfunctional as you would ever want to see, to the point where I was like, after I watched it, I needed a sip of water and a nap, But so these holiday dinners, brings out the best, brings out the worst. So what can we do as families to be sensitive and inclusive, when someone in the family is struggling? I would say, if a family member feels like they'd rather pass, and just not come to it, they don't want to see, Uncle Joe, drinking his 30 beers, or, they don't want to see Aunt Marie, swearing and cursing about, what a crappy life she had. Be sensitive to that and give the person the chance to just do something else. Don't make people feel compelled to show up if it's going to be triggering for them or be uncomfortable for them or add to their challenges. Other things, families have adopted, like a no alcohol, policy at some of the family gatherings, soda, soft drinks, punch that's not spiked, and just, and roll with something like that. And just the awareness, I think just the awareness that families have to have about, what they think, might be, might make their loved one, uncomfortable, and just try to, avoid doing that. There's a two-edged sword too. I mean, I've been in situations where, people who are in recovery just want everybody else to kind of have a good time, do what they do, don't not drink because I'm sitting here. And you got to be mindful of that too. People don't want to, necessarily feel singled out and everybody's having a crappy time because I'm here, and I choose not to drink. So, I guess there's no one right answer or one right approach. But I think just having the mindfulness around it, and always leading with love and compassion and understanding how you can't make a mistake. You can't make a mistake. Even if the outcome isn't what you had hoped it would be, your intention, was a loving intention. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Ken, when you said, not only leading with love, but, just being mindful of that person and how there is no, one size fits all approach to everybody. I think of my own experience, and I've been on both sides of that coin where, early on, yeah, it was a sober Christmas. I remember my first sober Christmas outside of a institution, and it was a sober Christmas. And then, fast forward a little bit, going back to the big family Christmas. And I looked up the Bear episode. I will be watching that. The IMDb sounds very interesting.
Strap in, brother.
Yeah, I will. Thank you for the warning. But the family Christmas is heavily centered around the celebration of alcohol, and many different ways. In my particular family upbringing and my personal interaction with it, and just so many different facets of it are around booze. and something that I adopted, I guess, at the suggestions of, again, Connection, many other people in recovery, is, I don't have to be there at, 10, 11 o'clock at night when people are sloppy drunk and making a fool of themselves. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be the first one there. Right? I'm going to, what can I do to help? What can I do to set it? You want me to set up the Christmas tree? You want to put up the food? What can I do to help? And then, I spend my time there and have a good celebration and do what I feel like I need to do to celebrate my particular holiday. And of course that's different for everybody. And then I leave. And then, all right, see ya. And whatever they do after that, that's their own thing. So, I really like the being mindful of that, and, also mindful, I guess, to sort of flip the script a little bit. I think all three of us here are sitting here, and we can bring to mind people who are, celebrating holidays for the first time without somebody, for a multitude of reasons. Maybe that person is still with us. Maybe that person is not. Maybe that person is in treatment. Maybe that person is MIA. And as a father, as, somebody who has gone through this, and I know from the article we keep referencing, and please, anyone that's interested, it's a great read. I've read it multiple times. Please go look it up and read it for yourself if you're interested. I wonder if you can speak to how you would cope with those holidays when your son was still in active addiction, and how you would manage, not only to support him, but also yourself and your other loved ones through the holidays.
Yeah. Great question. Tough question. One incident that I can think of, so having been in recovery, when Brendan was struggling, I tried to cleverly come up with all these, strategies for him. And who can I reach out to? How can I leverage my relationships with others who are still doing this work and somehow get him into the right place? I don't know how many times I did that, dozen, 2 dozen, something like that. So he had gone to this program in Maryland. He was there for 28 days. I mean, there were baseball players, there in treatment that had been sent by the MLB and all that. And so he spends his 28 days, and then he goes bed to bed from Maryland to Maine into like a sober house, a sober living arrangement in Portland. And he lives there for I think he came home 10 days before Thanksgiving. So he started in the summertime, I don't know, June, July. And then it took him all the way through November. And so he comes home 10 days before Thanksgiving. And I think, I don't know, 48 hours later, he relapsed. Okay. And I'll be lying if I said out loud today that, I was cool with that, I was not, I was still I thought about all the money that had just been spent. I thought about what is going on with, treatment these days. I mean, but then, he wasn't ready to stop. He just wasn't ready to stop. The addiction, had such a grip on his brain. He didn't have enough time for his brain to heal. I guess he didn't have enough time, to do the work that needs to be done, while you're in this sort of, recovery environment. And he fell, it disappointed, he has a brother and a sister that love him dearly. His mom was, around, and we were all just disappointed, and whether we handled it properly, probably not. Probably the disappointment was so palatable that it made him feel, worse. But I can't beat myself up too much about that, because I was still trying to figure it out, but nothing's a perfect solution.
But I bet, Ken, just like he could see how tired you were, but still see the love in your eyes, he could see how disappointed you were. And I think that's okay. But there was still love there, right? So I'm sure that there was some balance. I do think it's a great segue. I want to make sure that we say out loud before the end of this episode. I had let Ken know this as well. So we do run a family support meeting on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. And so that's tomorrow if you're watching live. And so tomorrow, December 20th meeting topic is perfectly fitted to the story you just described. It's the stages of readiness for change. So helping families understand, particularly at this time of year, where their loved one might be at, right, in regards to motivation and ambivalence and readiness for change, and what that does to the individual and to the family support system, and how to support people regardless of where they are, whatever stage they're at. So if folks need any extra support or want to join these meetings, they are open to anyone with a loved one who is struggling with addiction or substance use. And so you can just email magnolia@spectrumhealthsystems.org, and you'll get the Zoom link, and then you'll be on like the list forever. So if folks are interested in connecting to that or want to share that with a loved one, it is a supportive group. It's on Zoom. Someday we might do some in person, but right now we're still very Zoom centric, which allows us to. We've had people from Colorado and from other states join us.
From Canada.
So Canada, yes, we've had international connection, no cost. It's really just there to support families.
Completely
and
free,
loved
just
ones.
to support.
Yeah, Jesse's one of our facilitators. So, it really is a supportive group. But I think it really, that the topic describes exactly what you described in your son's experience, Ken, so well. And I think it'd probably be great for us to wrap up, not just with that resource, but the recognition that holidays can look a little different, right? How we connect with our loved ones can look a little different, and that's okay, right? Whether it's a shortened time frame like Jesse described to support his own recovery, or connecting on a different day or time, or doing something different than doing the same thing always, that might not be what your loved one wants or needs right now in this moment, is okay. And what I loved about how you described some options for families is, if we can have that mindfulness and awareness of how our loved one might need to be supported. And it's okay to have the conversation, right? You don't have to assume that your loved one wants a no alcohol policy, right? Some folks, like you said, might want you to do what you want to do, and they'll do their own thing. Or they might want it mitigated. Like maybe it doesn't get too heavy until after a certain hour when they're ready to leave or what have you. But I think that's having these conversations and being open about it are one of the ways in which we combat the shame and stigma, and it does not need to be a secret.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
I'd be remiss if I let this whole episode pass without mentioning the fact that I've done some family work for some years. Lisa had mentioned my involvement with the family support group in Fast and Magnolia. I also did some family work at our campus in Westboro, and just talking to you, it was both personally and professionally just very satisfying to see somebody who not only, has come out the other side, but, has picked up these lessons along the way. Certainly in my time speaking with family members, I would often tell them that, you're going through possibly the hardest time of your life. I recognize that. I understand that this gets very messy, and this gets very non-linear, and all the crisis phone calls that go with that, or crisis interventions and meetings and all that. So just to see somebody here who is, not only working their own recovery, but helping others. Also, it's very beautiful to note, as I too work at a outpatient facility that prescribes medication, and hopefully one day we'll have a recovery coach. So I know you will. So it's beautiful to see that, you're bringing that experience to where you're working and helping others. So I thank you very much for coming on here and sharing your story with us, Ken.
It was a pleasure, and thanks so much for inviting me. Grateful.
Thank you. I would say grateful is the word I would use as well. This has been a real blessing for me this week leading into my own holiday season. It's still one of my favorite hours of the month. This might be one of my favorite hours of the year as we start to count our blessings at the end of the year. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your vulnerability for you and your family's story. With that, we will see folks back in the new year in 2024, Airing Addiction. We've got a great episode really focused on peer recovery support centers and some science and evidence behind why that is supportive. We don't have a date yet, but we will get one soon. We've got Dr. Corey Vilsaint coming on to share the work that and research that she has been doing that really supports the peer recovery center model. So hope everybody
Exciting
has
stuff.
a healthy and happy season.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Happy
Ken.
holidays. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
As happy as we can make them.
Yes.